best camera settings for boudoir photographers. Today I'm giving you my best camera setting to give you photos like this, and this, and this. These settings are helping me with a $3,000 sales average. And it's a question that I've been getting over and over and over again. So I created this video just for you so you can take what you like and level up your boudoir photography business. Hey, I'm Tracy and I help boudoir photographers stay forever booked out without the hustle. Be sure to grab my free guide outlining my 5 best tips to book clients without Facebook ads. Okay, let's talk about the best settings for boudoir in natural light. Important note, I always shoot with the window shades open and the overhead lights off. We don't want to mix the light. The 3 settings you need to know are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Aperture controls how much light is let into the camera, but it also is in control of the style. If you shoot wide open like 1.2 or 2.8, depending on your lens, you're letting a lot of light into the camera and getting a dreamier look. Only a sliver is in focus, and everything else is a little bit blurry. If you shoot closed down, say like f11, you let less light into the camera and more is in focus. This is great when you also want the scene to be the star of the show. For boudoir, I prefer to shoot wide open at 1.2 on my 50mm and on my 70-200 at 2.8. So shutter speed is the amount of time that the light can actually enter the camera. It's also responsible for motion. If you have a 30-second shutter speed, you're letting light into the camera for a long time. Slow shutter speeds are really good for very dark places, but you would also see like light streaks. I think we've all seen those photos like online of traffic driving at night. Now, if you have a 1 in 4,000 shutter speed, you're not letting light into the camera hardly at all. This is great for really bright situations, but it also stops movement. So that's what you want if something is in lots of motion, like in sports or something driving or anything like that. The general rule for the slowest shutter speed you should use is 1 and then whatever your camera lens length is. But you also don't want to use that slowest option if you can avoid it. That way you don't run that risk of motion blur. Now the thing is, with boudoir photography, we're a little bit luckier because our clients are typically not moving. You pose them, they sit still, you have time. And that's why, like, say I'm using my 70-200, I will shoot at 1/200th. ISO is how sensitive your camera is to light. It's also responsible for the grain in your images. If you set to a low ISO, your camera is not very sensitive to light. You won't have any grain in your images. Use lower ISOs when you're in a place with lots of light or outside, midday. If you set to a low ISO, your camera is not very sensitive to light. The thing is, you're going to have grain in your images. Use higher ISOs when you're in a darker room, like in a cathedral or something like that, like at a wedding. Okay, now you know the back end stuff, so how do you know what to set for boudoir? So I typically shoot wide open for my aperture. My shutter speed is like 1/200th, and then all I really change in my studio space is my ISO. I expose for the highlight and then adjust my ISO to whatever it needs to be adjusted to be properly exposed. My ISO really is the only thing that changes. Typically, I keep it around 400. Sometimes, like throughout the day, if it feels like it's getting darker, if it's a cloudy day, it might go up to 1,000, even 1,600 sometimes, but that's about it. Now let's talk about the best camera settings for boudoir with a combination of natural light and off-camera flash. And this information comes from my lead photographer in St. Louis, Ashley. That's how she shoots. When you're combining flash with natural light, things have to be a little bit different, even though you are using typically the same settings. Ashley typically shoots at f4 because she says she's blind, and she is very, very focused on making sure her images are in focus. She told me that she really does prefer like the dreamier look wide open with her aperture, but because she's afraid that the photos won't be in focus, she actually shoots at f4. So at this point in her life and in her career, she has adopted more of a real life look at f4. So the first decision that you need to make is, do you want to adopt more of like a real life natural look inside the studio, or do you want to get rid of all of the extra light and only light the parts of the subject that you actually want lit? She said for every session that she shoots, she uses both types of lighting. She uses more of a natural look and she uses just artificial light. When she's replicating natural light, she sets her aperture, shutter speed, and ISO first. And she typically tries to leave her subject underexposed by about 1 stop. Her settings are typically f4, ISO 320, shutter speed 1/160th. I want to mention before talking about adding flash, shutter speed behaves so much differently with flash. You cannot go past your max sync speed, which is around 1/200th on Canon and 1/250th on Nikon. If you do, you have to enable something called high-speed sync, which we typically don't use. The flash freezes the motion, so I'm just using whatever shutter speed that I need to in order to slightly underexpose the image. That way we let enough natural light into the camera. Once the camera settings are set, just turn the flash on. Then you just dial it in until the subject is properly exposed. And generally, the flash for natural light replication is 1/16 power. Now, if we try to cut all natural light so that there's a black background, it's totally different. In this situation, we're just using the flash to paint some light where we want it. So you're going to create a black box on the back of your camera. It's better to do this in live view instead. Set your aperture to whatever you want it. We set it to f4. Set your shutter speed to max speed sync, 1/200th in Canon, 1/250th in Nikon. Start your ISO at 400 and then just reduce it until the image on the back of the camera turns black, not allowing any natural light in. And then you turn your flash on. For these, flash power is typically a little bit higher, usually around 1/4 power. Typically with flash, we don't have to really reset any settings because the flash stays mostly in the same spot, but if you move the flash, you have to redo your settings. So in conclusion, the best settings for boudoir photography is whatever works best for your style. But the thing is, you can create a similar look with both lighting styles. Ashley likes to use the light because she doesn't have to worry about her settings so much. She just makes sure that the nose is turned toward the light source as much as possible. Whereas me, I prefer natural light because I'm lazy and I really hate moving lights. And when I use them, because I have used them before, I just felt like I was constantly moving the lights around the studio and I hated it. So really, whatever works best for you is more based on what you like personally. But if you're asking this question, what are the best camera settings for boudoir? The real question you need to ask is, how do I get this look? Ashley likes to call her style real life. And while our styles are similar, I think mine's more on the dreamy side. I like to shoot wide open, either at 1.2 or 2.8, depending on my lens. And I like as much compression as possible. Ashley shoots at 4.0 because she wants to make sure that her photos are absolutely in focus. The thing that I want you to know, though, is our settings don't matter. They're not going to be the same as your studio, your space, your light. And to be honest, they're not the same as your style because we all have a little bit of a different style. It's more important to know the principles of lighting, then adapt that information to your own work in a way that makes sense for you. And that's the best camera settings for boudoir photography. Be sure to subscribe to get notified on my next video, 5 beginner boudoir mistakes and how to fix them. And while you wait for that, check out this other video, 10 things I wish I'd known before I became a boudoir photographer. If this was helpful, let me know and give it a like. Lainey says bye. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.